Welcome. Thank you for lending an ear to the Voice of the Times for Wednesday, June 9, 2021. For today's editorial, Energy Crunch presents a difficult paradox. The arrival of the month of June has brought it with a problem that is sadly all too reliable here in the Philippines. Summer electricity shortages caused by increased demand due to hot weather. For several days last week, the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or NGCP, and electricity distributors were forced to resort to rolling brownouts in and around Metro Manila and other parts of Luzon, cutting power to some areas for periods of time to avoid overloading the grid, as electricity demand exceeded available supply. On the one hand, we might view the return of the annual power shortages as a small sign of a return to normalcy amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year was a rare break from the problem, but only because there were still heavy restrictions on movement and economic activity. However, just as traffic congestion is a dubious indicator of economic vitality, our chronic energy shortage is a problem that requires solutions rather than salutations. What is distressing about the most recent round of power alerts is that, despite there being absolutely nothing different about them than any other year, the approach to addressing them has not changed in the slightest. The Department of Energy and Energy Regulatory Commission have sternly demanded the power producers explain the planned and unplanned plant shutdowns that resulted in short electricity supply at a time when demand was highest. Members of both houses of Congress have also called for a probe into the power crisis. Neither of these responses have ever resulted in substantial improvements in the past, and there is no reason to expect that they will now. The reason that the energy crunch is so difficult to solve is that it presents policymakers and stakeholders with a paradox. The manifestation of the problem of insufficient electricity supply is immediate, but the only rational solution to it, creating more electricity, cannot be immediately applied. We need more energy today, but under the most ideal circumstances, the soonest any new power source could be available would be in a year or two. By that time, it is quite likely that demand will have increased again. Supply then will constantly be playing catch up, and the energy deficit will never quite be resolved. That has been the pattern for the Philippines for 20 years or more, and even though it is well understood, efforts to break it have obviously been unsuccessful. Given that it inevitably takes some time to create new sources of power, the only real opportunity the country has to work toward eventually overcoming the chronic energy supply problem is to remove as many obstacles to energy development as possible, and thus shorten the amount of time the problem will persist from indefinitely to some tolerably small number of years. We have a few ideas about how more investment in the energy sector might be encouraged to accomplish that. First, market reforms that have either been proposed or are in development should be accelerated to give the demand side as much latitude as possible in sourcing power supplies. This includes the implementation of an electricity forwards market, immediately expanding the retail competition open access to every electricity consumer, regardless of size, and streamlining procedures to encourage consumers who are able to provide their own electricity and participate in net metering programs. Likewise, the government should give greater emphasis and incentives to energy conservation practices. Second, obstacles to investments such as slow and inefficient regulatory processes and banks' credit restrictions need to be assessed and reduced as much as possible. For example, one common complaint of energy sector investors is that banks are unwilling to offer financing for power generation projects unless there is already a guaranteed takeoff in the form of a power supply agreement. This arcane and unreasonably risk-averse policy effectively kills any opportunity to create the stable power surplus necessary to prevent seasonal shortages or to backstop the supply from sustainable but intermittent renewable energy sources. Finally, nothing should be off the table in terms of what types of energy could be developed. Certainly, we should prefer clean, sustainable sources of energy, but the availability of energy itself and not its type should be the priority. And that's the editorial for June 9, 2021. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print. Subscribe to its digital edition or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to the Voice of the Times.